Well, howdy there, YouTube. Welcome to another Thor video, wherein I talk about basically everything else on the costume besides the scales on the arms, which is mostly just going to be talking about material choice with a couple little pieces of advice in there. So, talking about leather and metal. Now, the first thing I would say, particularly when I say leather, is I would recommend using actual leather. On my previous Thor the Dark World costume, I actually used craft foam with a layer of vinyl over the top of it, which didn't look too bad, but it doesn't look as good as leather. And actually, one of the reasons I went for vinyl is I thought it was going to be less expensive, and that turned out to not exactly be the case. It's actually not too bad to buy packages of leather remnants for a Thor costume. They were about $5 each. Came with 10 or so pieces of leather, most of which were big enough to cover the different pieces of Thor's armor, because Thor's costume is actually made of a lot of smaller pieces of leather. A lot of, like, I don't know, maybe 6 by 6 inch pieces of leather. There were a few things I had to cheat on and use more than one piece of leather, but I kind of squeaked through it. So yeah, I it did, of course, with the leather remnants coming with like 10 pieces of leather. There were a few different colors, so I had to spend a little bit extra, and I ended up with some extra leather. But that's totally cool for using for other projects. It is still, I would say, definitely worth the subtle increase in cost to use actual leather on the costume. It adds. And I use weight and texture a lot when I'm talking about things that are better for a Thor costume, but that's the best way I can think of to put it. If nothing else, the leather offers a really nice feel to the costume, to how it moves and kind of how it feels. I'm not that into wearing leather. I don't know, but it makes it feel more authentic, which kind of really lends itself well to the performance of being Thor on a convention floor. So the other thing to talk about on the leather is the rivets, because Thor does have some rivets holding the leather on his costume, and for the most part, I just used kind of fancy brads for that. I do have a machine for riveting leather, but I actually never used it for that. A nice brad and some super glue does a heck of a lot to hold a costume together. Um, I've had to re-record this video a couple of times, so I may be losing track of where I'm at and what I've told you guys and what I haven't. So the other thing on Thor's costume is this. He's got several parts of his costume that has this leather with kind of this linear texture on it. Now, what I did for that is I just found these like cotton placemats that had this texture. What I haven't done on the costume yet is I want to add a little bit of fabric paint over the top of those to gloss them up a little bit so they look more like leather. Because right now they kind of read just fine, but I want them to be a little bit better. The metal is kind of the metal. It's kind of the trickier part, and it's one of the showier parts of my costume. Um, Now, what I've used for the metal on my latest Thor costume uh, are these sink backsplash tiles from this company called Facade. There's not loose pieces in there. I don't know. Sink backsplash tiles. This is a box of foot square sample tiles that you can get for, I think, you can get like 20 tiles for $30. So again, I have a bunch of those extra on hand for other projects. It's really cool for steampunk stuff. I've started fiddling a little bit with that. But yeah, these cut fairly easily with a nice pair of scissors. You can punch holes in them without too much trouble and fit, again, fancy brads through them so they look like rivets. And you can scribe into it pretty easy for the kind of lines Thor has in his armor. There are, I have had a little bit of trouble with them in regards to my Thor Hammer, which I've actually used these same metal tiles for my Thor Hammer. which, yeah, I'll get into that now. That seems as good a time to talk about it as any. So this is a sample of the tile I used for the metal on Thor's armor. It's actually the wrong color for Thor's armor, because Thor's armor is kind of a bronze color in the Dark World, and a gunmetal gray, kind of metallic silver sort of color in Age of Ultron. And this is actually a polished nickel, so it's kind of halfway between the two. And you'll notice on the back of this guy, not taking into account what's left of a paper label on that, the back of that is black gloss plastic. Now, this is the Argent silver facade tile, which you'll notice it kind of looks the same on both sides because the back of this is actually clear plastic, and something in how these are put together as opposed to these guys means this peels, and you can actually, I don't know, you probably can't, yeah, you can kind of see it peeling right there. Yep. Excuse me. I beg your pardon. So that's caused problems on my Thor hammer. For my next one, I'm actually not sure if I'm going to use these again or not. I mean, clearly with the peeling you'd think I wouldn't, but because this is a thin layer of foil over clear plastic, light shines through it. So if I wanted to make a Thor hammer that looks like a metal Thor hammer and still lights up, this would be perfect for that. I just have to fix the peeling issue. So, backing up a step, when we're talking about metal on the costume, the other thing to talk about are the rondelles. It's really hard to do this in a camera. The round pieces of metal on Thor's armor, the 6 round pieces of metal on Thor's armor that I call rondelles, because that's the technical term for a round piece of armoring covering a vulnerable spot, usually near an armpit. And I don't know what else to call these things on Thor's costume. Nothing I've seen has like an official name for them. And rondelles sounded more official and professional than Thorbs, because they're orbs on Thor's armor. Now, I've tried several things for those over the last few costumes. Mostly over the last couple, I've tried making them out of air drying clay and Sculpey, where I try to get them as domed as possible, and then add either the scroll work or kind of that hyphen pattern cut into them, or the rivets, you know, depending on which Thor costume we're talking about. On this newest batch, I got a little smart. I'm going to go ahead and try not to pat myself on the back too much for this. But I waited until Christmas stuff kind of went on clearance, and I found these giant ornaments, these giant metallic silver Christmas ornaments, and I cut circles out of them. So yeah, that's what the rondelles are made of. And actually, those again were kind of a thin silver foil over clear plastic. So if I decide to make my Thor costume light up, it'll actually be really easy to do that with those. The other thing I did for the scroll work on these newest rondelles I've made is I bought these fancy scrapbooking stickers that had this long, thin knot pattern. And then I cut all along one side of the knot pattern so it would follow the curve along the edge of a dome. Then I just added them to the Christmas ornament. So that was pretty quick and easy for something that looks so fantastic. It's really sharp. But yeah, those turned out really well. And then I just gave them a little blast of gold spray paint to bring them to like the same color as the polished nickel on the rest of the armor. That's most of the points I wanted to make about the leather and the metal. I do want to briefly talk about boots, because one of the things I have on my costume is I bought a set of Phantasma boots. Hashtag not sponsored. And that's what I used for my Thor boots, and I just kind of built the Thor boots onto the outside of those, where I used, again, the actual leather, but mostly those placemats, because most of what's on the boots, man, I can't see, yeah, most of what's on the boots is that texture. Now you can see there's a couple pieces that have fallen off down the ankle there, as I probably didn't make the best decisions with adhesives regarding that. I didn't, I've heard barge glue is super good for stuff like this, but I've never tried it. I've heard it's pretty gnarly to work with. So there's a little bit more I want to do on these guys. But again, like all the work I want to do on this costume, I'm going to wait until we get some more information about Thor Ragnarok, to see if the costume's different, how much it's different, and any alterations I want to make because of that. Um, I do, however, want to add some more to the bottom of these boots because, first of all, Thor's boots don't have that kind of a heel. They have more of a like modern day hiking boot heel, and adding that will actually give these a lot more padding. Because spending a whole day walking around a con in these, it's like getting your feet beaten with baseball bats. It's not fun. So we've talked about material choice and we've talked about boots. I haven't really talked too much about like the pattern I used for the costume, which I actually, devised myself. I was working on these right as the movies were coming out, so there wasn't a whole lot of other people working on these, and not a lot of people working on super detailed Thor costumes. Now, what I did recently for my Thor Age of Ultron costumes is I actually recorded the patterns I used. I actually drew them out on a graph of my own devising, and I have posted these in the replica props forum. I'm going to have a link to the forum where I posted those below. Now, it's not a pattern for the entire costume, I'm afraid. There are some parts, like the boots, are actually kind of inaccurate, so I haven't posted patterns for those. It's mostly a pattern for the chest, for the front of the chest. Not too much the sides. The sides are kind of fiddly. And if nothing else, to make sure it fits you, my pattern probably wouldn't work because there's, some different angling on pieces you have to do and some different lengths on pieces you have to do. But yeah, totally have a pattern for like that front third of Thor's costume for the torso, the part, most people see. And there's a link to that. If you guys want to use that pattern, you're welcome to. Sorry, it's in inches for anybody who uses the metric system. I'd work in inches. Not today, inventor of the metric system. Not today. Well, I think that's about everything I wanted to talk to for this, third Thor video. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below and I will address them as best I can. There's still going to be a few more videos in this series, even though we've talked about most of the Thor costume. I'm probably going to do a video talking about how I made my Thor Hammer, and then another video as I build a new Thor Hammer to replace him, and then another video, not necessarily in that order, talking about the Thor Ragnarok costume as soon as we have enough detail on that. So I hope you guys stay tuned for those videos, and I will see you there.